welcome to hour two of As Goes Wisconsin. Greg Buck is on the board and joining me in studio. Very excited to speak to a longtime television broadcaster, a longtime Republican congressman who represented Wisconsin's second congressional district. And he's out with a new podcast called Lost in the Middle, America's Political Orphans. Welcome, Scott Klug.
Thanks, Shane. A longtime fan from your days down the road at 620.
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you in person.
Nice to meet you as well. Now, your podcast, Lost in the Middle, America's Political Orphans. Why did you decide to start this?
It started actually in the preceding Kevin McCarthy fiasco when I worked in TV in Madison before I was in Congress. And people of a certain age will still recognize me. To other people, it's just like, who's that old guy with the gray hair? But I got stopped in cereal aisles at a grocery store and lying in a movie theater with people sort of going, what the flock is going on? I meant the Republicans are running around the country banning middle school books, and the Democrats are trying to take my gas stove out of the kitchen. It was like, who elected these people? So I talked to an old friend of mine who runs a website in Wisconsin called Wis Politics. Jeff Mayers is an old buddy who actually used to cover me when I was in Congress.
And we've had him on the show.
Yeah. And I said, we should think about doing a podcast about the lost political middle. So the statistics are 42% of the American public self-identifies as a centrist. So that's 71 million voters. And my sense is nobody's listening to them. I mean, it's a clown show in Washington, no matter what your politics are. And people want some sense of return to normalcy. So we decided to do two things, sort of take a snapshot of how we got here and where we are. And then the second part of it is looking for good stories around the country. And so we're 2 episodes in, about to drop a third on October. You can find in the middle of next week in October. And you can find us at www.lostmiddle.com. You can stream online, or you can download it if you're a podcast fan.
How did we get here?
It's a complicated story. Part of it is, I'm going to point the finger at the media, right? So if you look somewhere in 1994, somewhere in America, somebody bought a used 10-year-old Oldsmobile. What does that have to do with anything? Say your listeners now driving off the road, because that's when Craigslist popped. So somewhere the first used car got sold, and that destroyed the newspaper business. A third of their revenue came from classified advertising.
Yes.
Along came the internet and fostered even more. And newspapers didn't charge at the beginning. And then subscribers said, well, I get this for free.
Why should I?
Yeah. So if you look, the hollowing out of the newspaper industry is a big issue, because who they're left to chase, Jane, are people who go down a specific rabbit hole. And that's the story of the newspaper world. In fact, in our episode that's coming up on the media, we actually talked to a guy who ran a website called Newspaper Graveyard, because they were folding at the rate of 2 or 3 or 4 a month. Now, why does that matter? I'll give you a quick example. So there were 3 researchers who decided to take a look at newspaper deserts where newspapers went away. And they looked at a long history of voting patterns, and they found wherever there was a newspaper desert, ticket splitting disappeared, because now everything became nationalized. So in my district, Bill Clinton won it, but I won it. You know, that was sort of the pattern where people would split. So a newspaper editor in Palm Springs knew about this research, and she said, I wonder what happens if I knock off all the national opinions on my editorial page and I get rid of all the letters involving national issues. So she calls these researchers up and said, hey, I got a deal for you. So they interviewed 1,000 of her subscribers. Meanwhile, they interviewed 1,000 subscribers in Ventura, California, which is a couple, 3 hours drive away. And so for a month, she took everything down. And when they went back a month later and measured it, partisanship had dramatically dropped in Palm Springs, and it continued to rise in Ventura, because now the papers were focused on local community issues, what people cared about.
Yes.
Now, she's a Gannett paper. So they do this study, gets applause all around the country, and then Gannett announces, well, we're going to eliminate all of the local opinion page, because we can just run all the same crap nationally in every local paper. Oh, it's completely cheaper.
Yep.
Here's the punchline. So they fired their opinion editor in Palm Springs after doing this experiment. But the community rallied, and at a GoFundMe page raised enough money to hire another opinion editor. And 6 months later, along came Gannett and said, that getting rid of local opinion editors wasn't such a good idea because it's the only way people still subscribe to newspapers because they want to know about high school sports. They want to know about obituaries. They want to know what's going on in the city council and the
Yep.
county board. Meanwhile, in Seattle, a guy I used to work with at King TV, Randy leaves Seattle one day. I thought he went to CNN. I left to go work in local television in Washington from Seattle. And I get a message about maybe the fifth or sixth day after I got elected said, please call Randy Douthit. It's like, what in God's name does Randy Douthit want me for? He was the guy who created Crossfire.
Oh, sure.
So I tracked Randy down in California and said, basically you turned Meet the Press into sports radio. I meant it's now a food fight. You can't have a straight conversation anymore. And I'm just giving Randy crap because we're old friends. Now, here's the punchline that's even better. Guess where he ended up? After he left Crossfire and destroyed television news as we know it.
Oh, he went to Fox.
No, he was the creator of Judge Judy.
Oh.
So follow the trend line. So part of how did we get here is really what's happened in the media, which really drives a lot of our perception and our coverage. And people just go whatever rabbit hole they want to chase down. Yeah. And the other thing that came up, I got up early this morning and started to write a column about the people we've interviewed around the country who lost friends and family at Thanksgiving dinners because it turned into a fight over COVID and masks and Biden and Trump. Yeah. So one of the other great stories we talked to is a woman in Utah. So one of the stories we decided to do was operating under the theory that America just needed a big timeout. And so we needed to find a mom who'd do it. So meet Tammy Pfeiffer, mother of 5 children, 3 grandchildren, special ed teacher, city council member in Logan, Utah, the governor's secretary of education for a stint. She and her husband, it just completes the picture. She and her husband both used to sing in the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. So this happens, and she says, this has got to end. I mean, it's that way in my household. They had a big blow up. She said with her 5 kids, she's got a Republican, an independent, a Democrat, a social democrat, and a libertarian.
Wow.
And she said it's great because they've all found their own space. But at 2 Thanksgivings ago, they all started to argue. There was no consensus. And these kids grew up with politics, putting their mom's lawn signs out. So she decides to work with a national group called Unite. And what Tammy decides to do is she's going to work with the Unite folks and people at Utah State to develop a political civility index. The idea would be that, Jane, if you and I are in a political debate and I say, here's where I am on immigration. And you say, I don't agree with that. But, we both agree that the dreamers should have a path to citizenship,
right,
or more of the wall should get built.
Right.
Or if I say, if it's up to you, the illegal immigrants will overrun the country. That's why they call it illegal and you're nuts and the country's going to go to hell. Well, that's not what you want to score. So she works for months, works with social scientists, works with kids, doing focus groups, has Republicans, Democrats, independents on panels, and come up with this big matrix. She's all proud. She's all excited. She puts it on Facebook. Tick, tick, tick. 24 hours later, she has to take it down.
Oh, my goodness.
Because everybody got in a fight with everybody else. And she's like, no. That's the whole point of it. So Tammy continues to work on this project. It's starting to get traction in places around the country. And so if you look at that story, the story of the Palm Springs editor, there's lots of cool stories out there. Nobody tells you. They just want whatever the pie fight of the night is.
Well, it's called clickbait, and it's called clickbait for a reason, and that's how they get their revenue now, is by getting clicks on things. If you're just joining us, former GOP Congressman Scott Klug, longtime television personality, is our guest right now on As Goes Wisconsin, and we are talking about his new podcast, trying to find a place for the 71 million Americans who feel basically like they are politically homeless. Aren't both parties the same, though, Scott, in their levels of extremism?
Well, and here we started to talk about what drives this. Clearly, there's issues with redistricting issues. So if you look in 2022, there was actually, in Wisconsin, as there often is, an explosion of ticket splitting. So people talk about the fact people don't do that anymore. They did. They did it in the Wisconsin governor's race and in New Hampshire and Arizona and Georgia and lots of places around the country. But if you look at House races around the country these days, I think there's only 9 members who represent a district that isn't the same as the presidential vote. So we've essentially stripped the incentives out of the system for people to get rewarded for collaboration. And so that's one of the problems. And as we go on further on with our podcast series, Lost in the Middle at www.lostmiddle.com. We're going to spend part of the summer next year talking about reform ideas. Now, look, I was a journalist. I was a politician. Now I'm a lobbyist. So cynicism comes easily. So part of me says any system you try to fix can eventually be scammed. Somebody will work an angle, but it's got to be better than it is today. And we have to figure out some way to reward people who try to reach across the aisle. And, we interviewed Frank Luntz, who a lot of your folks who are political junkies will know does focus groups all around the country. And Frank says, if you get 65% of what you want, by definition, that's a win.
That's a win.
Yeah, you can't have to be a purist. And that's part of what's driving those 41 million Americans like me crazy.
Yeah, I want everything that I want, and anything less than that is not acceptable. And as you said, even over the last decade, the word compromise has become such a dirty word.
Well, people will say they don't like the word compromise because that sounds like I gave something up. But if you say we collaborated to find a solution, there's sort of a give and take in there. And
Okay.
actually, people don't usually talk about bipartisan solutions. If you listen to average folks, they talk about nonpartisan solutions. They want to take the parties out of it. They just want people to do something smart and act the right way.
Well, as a journalist and a longtime TV person and a politician as well, we're going to come back after the break and talk about the power of words, because we've been talking about this a lot on the show. The words people choose to use are very specific for a reason, and that carries with it both the good and very dangerous ramifications. So that will be on the other side of the break. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you will stick around. This is As Goes Wisconsin. You are listening to the Civic Media Radio Network. Welcome back to As Goes Wisconsin. Jane McNair in for Kristen Brine. Greg Bach is on the board, and we are joined by former Republican congressman who represented Wisconsin's 2nd Congressional District. Longtime TV personality and journalist Scott Klug is here talking about his new podcast called Lost in the Middle, America's Political Orphans. And right before we went to break, we were talking about words and the power of words and how in many instances in politics, they are chosen very specifically. And I refer to the one that comes top of mind is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who has said on the campaign trail that once he's elected president, on the first day, they're going to start slitting throats, is what he said.
Yep.
We know from Donald Trump, from the first time he came down the elevator, Mexicans are rapists. Don't be so gentle, cops, when you're putting people in squad cars. Knock them out, punch them out. In the good old days, we used to be able to beat people up. That's all very intentional, isn't it?
Oh, I think so. But I also will say that I think it's on both sides of the aisle. They may be the most sort of celebrated at the moment, but the rhetoric can be just as bad on other sides. Let me tell you another story talking about sort of trends to make things better. So imagine you're a new newspaper editor in Duluth, Minnesota, and you took a job from Chicago to go to Duluth because it's Minnesota nice. It's not going to be rough and tumble like Chicago politics
Sure.
are. It's going to be a whole different spirit. We've all listened to Garrison Keillor.
Right,
It's
right.
that little town, Lake Wobegon and everything else in the world. And so this guy walks through the newsroom. This is about 10 years ago now. And there's 4 cop cars on their way to the city council because a fist fight has broken out. And so, and this isn't the first fist fight at the Duluth City Council. And what was going on is they had a huge budget deficit. There were fights about cutbacks in city services, pension fights, all that sort of thing. And so it got so bad that they actually had to pull all the city council, all the county board members, the commission that oversaw the airline or the airport, and they actually looped in folks from Superior and then Douglas County, Wisconsin, to try to figure out what to do. And they actually came up with a pledge called Speak Your Piece, which they cleverly spelled as PACE rather than PIECE. But what they did is actually came up, talking about the rhetoric you were talking about, with pledges that everybody gets as soon as they get elected to the office, that most people still carry in their wallet to this day, that the essence of it, it sounds like you're in kindergarten or first grade, right?
Right.
Respect other people's opinions, admit when you're wrong, let people say their piece. The U.S. is based on people having very different solutions to real problems. But you and I can be passionate about it on the floor. It doesn't mean you can't be angry, you can't raise your voice, but it means I've got to respect your opinion. And when the debate's over, it's over, and we'll remain friends. Now, I just published a story in Real Clear Politics for those of your friends who are political junkies called The Other Kevin McCarthy. Because one of the guys we interviewed in our first episode about America's 71 million frustrated middle of the road centrist voters is Kevin McCarthy, but not the Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy, who'll be a guy near and dear to your heart, who's a morning DJ in Rockford, Illinois, and who's been on the Winnebago County Board for 10 years. And he looked at the first Kevin McCarthy fiasco and the language and the wording that was used from both sides of the aisle. And he said, this is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we've got 18 people on the Winnebago County Board, and most of the time we vote, it's 18-0 or 16-2 or 17-1. And then you know what we do afterwards? We go out afterwards and get pizza and a beer.
Right.
So that's the Kevin McCarthy I've been looking to, not the Kevin McCarthy in Washington. And it's the great shame that so much of the rest of the country at the local level in particular works together and gets things done. And it's completely been lost on our friends in Washington.
Yeah, definitely. And I also maintain that if you have to resort to insults and talking over your opponent, then you have no argument.
Right.
You got nothing, dude. You have nothing. Once you start using profanity and personal insults or anything of that type, that just exposes your complete lack of credibility.
Well, and if you ask most Americans, about 60% are worried that it's going to lead to violence. And if you look across the pond, 2 members of the British Parliament have been killed in the last 4 years by constituents. Once by somebody mad about Brexit, once by somebody who was mad about Islamic terrorists or whatever the case might be. So there is now in the UK a British Civility Award. And the first guy they gave it to was the person who was the point for the Conservatives on the Leave Brexit campaign. I mean, Brexit in the UK is like abortion in the US on steroids. So, but the guy who led the Brexit campaign, the night they won on Brexit, he stood up and said, look, usually what happens is when politicians win, they crow about it, and it turns into a beating match on the other side. And he said, it's not that I'm not happy. I'm going to go home and have a quiet glass of champagne by myself, because tomorrow morning we're going to have to heal these wounds
and get to work
yep. and figure out how to make that work. And when was the last time you heard a politician in America stand up and say that? I can't remember the last time.
Well, you can hear more from Scott Klug in his podcast called Lost in the Middle, America's Political Orphans. Where can people find your podcast?
Well, actually, they can find it on Civic Media because it's on the pages. So that's the first place I'd send you. If not, you can go to any of the podcasts that sources that you use. So we're on Buzzsprout and Apple and, every other common one. If you go to our website, www.lostmiddle.com, if you're not a podcast person, you can actually stream the episodes on there. So the first one is about the 71 million orphans. The next one was about civility, we've talked a little about. And the third one that comes up next week is whether somebody can really make a serious run as an independent candidate for president.
Thank you so much for coming in today. It's really been interesting having you. We will absolutely have you back. Scott Klug joining us this morning live in studio. Stay close. We'll be right back after the break. This is As Goes Wisconsin on the Civic Media Radio Network. Welcome back to As Goes Wisconsin. Jane Matnier in for Kristen Bry. Greg Buck is on the board. That's Dolly Deer singing about that D-I-V-O-R-C-E, Greg Buck.
Yep. Originally done by Tammy Wynette.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And we bring this up because Greg Buck stumbled on this article today.
Yeah. In a new interview with Jada Pinkett Smith,
Will Smith's wife.
Keep her name out your mouth.
Okay.
She says in an interview that in her upcoming memoir that Will Smith and her have been separated and lived separate lives since 2016. I was more shocked than I should be, because it's two people who I don't know and their lives are their business. But the slap that happened at the Oscars, even though time is irrelevant, it's a construct, and it feels like this morning was 9,000 years ago.
Right.
Was last year.
Gosh, that was just last year.
It'll be 2 years. It'll be 2 years in March.
When Will Smith slapped Chris Rock.
Correct.
At the Oscars.
Yep, because he wouldn't keep his wife's name out of his mouth. And that was 2022. And now she's coming out saying this, and I'm trying to not be gossipy about it, but I'm trying to understand the psychology of a couple, especially, they're a couple of color. They're Hollywood. They are a powerhouse couple. They're not just famous. They are like
They got
Will
clout,
Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith.
for sure.
So, and it just doesn't make sense to me at this time. Like 2016, they could have gotten divorced. They could have separated. And I think the world would have moved on and been okay. Like, we would have understood. Maybe 15 years ago, not so much. I have no idea. But I guess for me, the question I raised was, why would you do this? And we wanted to put it out to anyone listening. Have you ever been through something similar where you were separated, but you didn't get divorced? Or, it's something where you just couldn't have a clean break.
844-967-2789, 844-96-party. It's interesting because in most instances, people want to get away from each other as quickly as possible when they file for divorce.
Yeah.
And in the case of Jada and Will, these are well-established, wealthy people.
Yeah.
And I think in, tragically, many marriages, one of the reasons why they don't split is because of money.
Yeah.
It's a big money issue, and divorce can be expensive, especially if it's contentious. And one might feel they're going to be left at a financial disadvantage if they leave the relationship, but that isn't the case in this instance.
And another instance can be children. You don't want to split it because of the children.
Sure.
But Will and Jada have been very open in the past few years about their lives, their marriage, their home life. Their children are
young adults.
young adults in their teens and 20s, I believe, now
I
too.
think they're both in their 20s.
Yeah. So, I guess I'm just trying to. Was it one person hoping for a resolution? Was it both people saying, "Hey, this." We live in a house that's as big as 14 houses. So you have the east wing, I'll take the west wing. Do you not just, this is, by the way, anyone listening, this is not a criticism. This is not me saying, shame on you. I'm truly trying to understand the methodology of this. And if you have something similar or know someone similar, feel free to call in, text us, comment on the live stream. We'd love to know. Just get an insight, because I'm married almost 11 years in a couple weeks.
Congratulations.
Boom. I did it for 11 years. Jane, you've been with your husband for 21 years. So
yes.
That for me, it's not a realm I live in, and I'm trying to understand.
Well, and it is. It's just, what is the benefit? What is the benefit to this? Because as you said, Jada has said in an interview with today's Hoda Kotb that they've been separated since 2016. They live separately from each other. Why is our marriage fractured? That's a lot of things. And I think by the time we got to 2016, we were exhausted with trying. I think we were both stuck in our fantasy of what we thought the other person should be. Okay. But she says at one point she did consider a legal divorce, but couldn't go through with it. Quote, "I made a promise that there will never be a reason for us to get a divorce. We will work through whatever. I just haven't been able to break that promise," unquote. But by living separate lives and living separately, haven't you already broken that promise?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, okay, legally you're still married, but you're living separate lives. So that's essentially being divorced, technically, or still being married because you don't have the divorce paper. 844-967-2789, 844-96-party. Does this sound familiar to you? Is this a situation that you have lived through? You and your spouse decided for whatever reason that even though we don't get along anymore, even though we don't necessarily have the same love for each other, but we're going to stay together anyway, but still live completely separate lives.
I thought maybe one thing too is just, most people have the luxury of getting divorced in peace and quiet and privacy. This is something that would splash across every newspaper in the world for months, if not longer, depending on how contentious. And it doesn't sound like if they got divorced, it would be contentious. They seem to be individuals who love each other
and still care about
and
each
care
other.
And can do this amicably, but that doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. That the kernel of truth does not help quell lies. Wow, that was very, very wow. I write that down.
Oh, you're gonna have to write. Yeah, mark that. We have Pat checking in on the app, listening in Green Bay. Al Gore is still separated. I did not realize that. I thought Al Gore and Tipper got divorced. But generally, that makes a little more sense to me, though, generationally, because younger generations now don't believe divorce has a stigma. For older generations, that was a stigma, especially if you were a woman who was divorced. Maybe there are religious reasons, I suppose, where you wouldn't get divorced. But again, in this instance, I find it really, they're both relatively young people, aren't they? Only in their early 50s.
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
You could still find a relationship, find
Absolutely.
some
Well,
companionship.
and like I don't want this to sound gossipy, but from apparently one of the worst kept secrets in Hollywood is that their marriage had been open for years. So like I don't know. I like I said, I'm trying to get past the whole celebrity of it all. And maybe I can't because they are celebrities, but it just doesn't make sense to me that you would stay with you would present yourself as a happy couple and then say all of a sudden, just out of a sudden, you're like, nope, no, we've been separated for 7 years. Especially in the light of her Red Table show, where she was all about the truth and famously told the world that she had
An affair.
an affair with her son's friend. I mean, and I don't know. I want everyone to be happy. I guess I want Will Smith to be happy too.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course we do. But again, in this day and age, old Hollywood used to hide divorces.
Old Hollywood hid everything.
Old Hollywood hid everything. And
Yeah.
now everything's out there and everybody shares everything, sometimes to the point of sharing perhaps a little too much. And I don't believe either of them to be particularly religious. So I don't understand. Again, I think it's lovely that they still care about each other. But if that's the case, then I don't know.
Then let him go.
Right.
It's
Isn't it to the point where I love you, this is no longer working for us, go be free.
Yeah.
Go fly and find some other relationship that will take you to a happier place, and we can care for each other as we go fly in our separate directions.
It's always about birds with you, isn't
I
it? It's
love
always birds. It's always birds.
David Drake, I need you.
Oh, geez. Whoa.
I don't get it.
Yeah, neither do I. And there was a woman named Lisa who's trying to call in. Lisa, if you're still trying to come through and you have some advice, let us know. But yeah, I found it very interesting that a man committed physical assault on television in front of tens of millions of people and gave this idea that like, that is my wife, that is my partner. You don't speak about her like that. Now, the context of the whole situation, that's another discussion. And honestly, a friend of mine said that if you really want to know about Will Smith as a person, as far as his protective nature, his book gives very deep insight to his dealings with physical violence and the and his mother and things like that. So that, but the point is that you think, oh, okay, this is a man who truly loves his wife, and they like, okay. And then she says this, and it almost makes me wonder, why'd you then do it, buddy? Like,
well, maybe it was because to put forth the image that I am the great protector.
yeah,
everything is fine. We are solid, even though we've been separated for, the last 6 years, which had to have been a pretty open secret in Hollywood.
yeah.
So he felt the need to do that for their image in front of the American public, apparently. 844-967-2789, 844-96-PARTY. Is this you? Have you and your spouse been separated for a long time and it's working just great for you and everybody's happy? Or are you perhaps a little more in the normal camp where, yeah, I want this done and I want my stuff and then I'm moving away? Because I can remember an ex-boyfriend of mine, his mother and father had been separated probably for 25 years. He didn't even live in the same state anymore. And I never understood Why? Why continue with this charade? Because that's what it is.
I have to believe it's a money thing at the end of the day.
And it is. I mean, divorce can be very expensive unless you can, and even a non-contentious divorce.
Yeah.
Even if you agree to, we're going to split everything down the middle and everything is fine. And, I don't hate you and you don't hate me and we'll go our separate ways. And so certainly there's money involved. But for someone like Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith, that isn't the case.
Yeah. That, or it's just like you can't admit that it's over. Or there are some couples, there are Catholic couples who separate and never get divorced because it does not allow divorce. But, come on, man. Come on.
Well, we're going to move on. We only have one more break coming up, and Aaron Rodgers just won't go away.
I have a fun addition to that coming up too with that. A breaking story from another former Packer who's acting just as douche.
Oh, no, really?
Yeah. So
okay, we'll have all the details coming up on the latest douche moves by a former. He was our hero.
I know.
He was a Green Bay hero, and now he's a douche bro.
He's. I know, it's so depressing that it's weird. At the time they were here, it was all like, oh my gosh, they're amazing. And as soon as they leave, like, oh, they're trash. Just trash.
What happened to you? See, I don't think anything happened to him. I think we are finally seeing the real Aaron Rodgers. All right, we've got all the details coming up on the other side of the break. Stay with us. You're listening to As Goes Wisconsin. We are on the Civic Media Radio Network.
Everything you said was a lie. You're a douche, you're a douche, you're a big fizzy douche. But you're still a really, really handsome guy. Thank you. You're a douche, you're a douche, you're a big fizzy douche. And you're not sad and alone.
Welcome back to As Goes Wisconsin. Jane Mattner in for Kristen Bry. Greg Bach is on the board. You can always check in with us at 844-967-2789. You can call and or text or leave a comment on the live stream. Earlier in the show, in the 10 o'clock hour, we were talking about Republican New York Congressman George Santos, who has been hit with more charges of fraud and basically stealing from his donors for his own profit. And he's not going to resign and he's not going to step down and everything is, he's innocent. And again, the man deserves due process, certainly. But I don't know. It's I think this is going to be a tough sell for him. And we did ask for your comments. So I just wanted to back up to a few of them. Every time I hear George Santos's name, this is from John from the Falls, I think of John Lovitz on Saturday Night Live, which is so funny. Wasn't he the used car salesman?
He was a used car salesman. He was the acting.
Oh, that's right.
He was the liar. He was the pathological liar.
Yes.
He was all the things. He was, that's a good comparison.
That is a good comparison, John. And then from the 414, I'm half surprised that Santos is not on the short list for speaker. Absolutely. I'm surprised he's not on the short list for Donald Trump's running mate. Right? There's a duo. There's a duo for you.
It would never happen. George Santos would steal his spotlight because he's just,
Well, and yes, Trump does not like anyone overshadowing him in any way, shape, or form. Speaking of a different kind of douche, Aaron Rodgers.
Douche.
Former beloved quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. Was he on the Pat McAfee show again?
So the whole thing started with on the Pat McAfee show, Aaron Rodgers referred to Kansas City's Travis Kelce, or as I like to refer to him,
Mr. Swift.
Well, I was gonna say the Travis Kelce is dating that pop star, but called him Mr. Pfizer because Travis Kelce has been vaccinated, and
was he in an ad for Pfizer?
Possibly, I have no idea. All I know is I have a clip of this. So Aaron Rodgers just makes the comment on Pat McAfee, and the two guys on beside flanking him on the show are like, "You're the funniest guy ever! Oh my gosh, Aaron Rodgers!" And so the next day, Travis Kelce comes out into a press conference and says this.
Pretty good. I mean, with the stash right now, I look like a guy named Mr. Pfizer. Who knew I'd get into the vax wars with Aaron Rodgers, man? It's Mr. Pfizer versus the Johnson & Johnson family over there, man.
I don't think we asked you about, since you're in the commercial, can you kind of just say why you
It looks like it was in the
I mean,
commercial.
I've always been, once I got the vaccine, and I got it because of, keeping myself safe, keeping my family safe, the people in this building. So yeah, I stand by it 1,000%, and fully comfortable with him calling me Mr. Pfizer.
Travis, anything?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a response. It wasn't fire breathing. It wasn't anything crazy. He was just like, oh, he called me that, whatever. I got to move on. And I believe in this. And can we move on to football? And I have a mustache. And by the way, I get to make it with Taylor Swift and you all don't. So
there's other things. Yes.
So Aaron Rodgers, on what seems to be prolonged bed rest right now because, 75 seconds into a game, he can't hold his weight, decides to say that go on the only podcast for Aaron Rodgers, Pat McAfee, and says the following.
Listen, Mr. Pfizer said he didn't think he would be in a vax war with me.
Oh, boy.
Didn't think he'd be in a vax war with me. This ain't a war, homie. This is just conversation. But if you want to have some sort of duel, debate, have me on the podcast. Come on the show. Let's have a conversation.
Okay.
Pass it out.
Let's do it like in John Wick 4.
Red
right?
flag.
We both have a second.
Nice.
Right? For somebody to help us out. I'm going to take my man, RFK Jr.
Okay.
Oh boy.
Okay.
as an independent.
Hell yeah.
Right? And he can have, Tony Fauci or some other pharmacrat, and we can have a conversation about this.
Okay. Well, I'm happy we got that sorted. Thought for sure.
He's so clever. Did he call Dr. Anthony Fauci a pharmacrat?
He called him a pharmacrat.
He's so clever.
Aaron Rodgers is so good. He doesn't just play football. He makes up words.
And we should believe his scientific expertise.
Yes, and RFK, not Dr. Fauci, the man who literally has spent the past, I don't know how many decades,
5 decades,
helping people, because Dr. Fauci is he's a horrible person. He's in the pocket of big pharma.
I just find this so indicative of how much it pains Aaron Rodgers not to be completely in the spotlight.
Yeah,
I think that's what all of this is about. It's just his poor, underfed ego, because there's attention going to Travis Kelce.
And he's got these two guys, Tweedledum and Tweedle Stupid, on besides him going, oh, what's up, bro? Yeah, bro. It's like, dude, like, do you... First of all, Travis Kelce doesn't got time for you, Aaron Rodgers. He's too busy playing football, which you are not doing right now.
Exactly.
You're going on podcasts and saying stupid things all the time. And like, seriously, like, I'm so bewildered by this. Like, it's like embarrassing because they still refer to him as a Packer sometimes.
Oh, stop.
Yeah.
No, he's not a Packer. No, he's yours now, Jets.
You get to have him.
You get to own him.
But not to be from just a bro douchey dude at a bar, but to a little bit more important, Brett Favre reportedly refusing to release tax returns in welfare fraud case.
Really?
Yep, he has. There have been 27 requests, and he has denied all of them. And it is in the tax filing requested alleged connected to Favre getting around $8 million in funds obtained in the TANF program.
Yep.
So he's awesome too.
Oh, that's fabulous. We're just about up against the break and the top of the hour news. I want to share one comment from you coming from the 630 listening in Madison. This might be my favorite segment title ever. A duo of douchey douchingtons.
You're welcome.
Also love your show. Well, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for loving the show. If you love the show, join us again tomorrow morning starting at 10 o'clock. Carol Kane will be here for an extra day.
Ooh.
And we're going to be talking to Dr. Kristen Lyerly. We'll be back with our public service announcement. If you ever have any questions for her, you can always text them at 844-967-2789 or email them to us at asgoeswisconsin@civicmedia.com. Enjoy this beautiful, beautiful day. This is going to be the last one we're going to see for a
And
while.
it's my last one for a couple days.
Yes, you are going to be out on the road.
Yep.
So Calvin will be filling in as producer. Join us again tomorrow and stay tuned for the news. You're listening to As Goes Wisconsin on the Civic Media Radio Network.